Do you want your teenager to go on the adventure of a lifetime, all the while learning the ability to know God's truth, discern wisely, and take godly action in the world? My name is Andrew Hawk, and I'm the camp director at the Excel Summer Leadership Camp. Every summer, we take teenagers on 2-week adventures to help them grow in their leadership, discernment, and Christ-like character. Between camping, rock climbing, hiking, and whitewater rafting, campers build lifelong friendships while also training in Excel College's game-changing critical thinking method. They'll learn to filter through the cultural messages of the day with godly wisdom, and to learn how to apply those in the method in real-life context through wilderness first aid and CPR training. A few months ago, I received a message from Melissa, one of our past campers. When her mom and her were overseas, her mother got injured, and she used her training to make a huge difference, according to doctors, to be able to get help when it was needed. We love to hear stories like this. Not only do campers leave with practical skills, but also with a deeper faith in Jesus and lifelong community. I want to personally invite your teenager to join us this summer by going to theexcelcamp.org to learn more. That's theexcelcamp.org.
If you ask most people, why did Jesus come? They will say he came to die on the cross to forgive us for our sins, which is absolutely true. Yes, he did. But if you listen to what Jesus said of himself, he said, I'll come to give you life.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Follow to Lead podcast, a Christian leaders podcast powered by EBEB Solutions, energy benefits for every business. Go to EBEBsolutions.com and get your free energy audit today. Start saving money and energy, literally. Guys, today on the podcast, I'm so excited to bring you Dale Sellers. Dale is the CEO of the 95 Network. Now, the 95 Network represents American churches that have less than 500 attendees, which happens to make up roughly 95% of the American church landscape. It's incredible. It's incredible to think about. In our conversation today, we talk about what it means to lean in to leadership in the church, how to support your pastor. We talk about his own journey of stepping out in faith. I absolutely love Dale's heart, and this is one of those conversations that I think it's so important as you're involved in the local church body. The church needs you, and Dale's going to tell you all about it and so much more. So now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Dale Sellers. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited today to have one of my new friends, host of a fellow podcast host, 95 Network CEO, Dale Sellers. Dale, thank you so much for taking the time to agree to be on the podcast.
It's my privilege. You were on my podcast yesterday, and I feel like we've been lifelong friends ever since.
Me too. Me too. So I know your story a little bit. You have done a lot of things throughout your life. Mm-hmm. You've been in and out of professions. You're currently leading a movement of church pastors. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how would you describe the calling that God has placed on your life?
Apostolic, if that's a word that you understand, or you use. It's used in certain settings. It's not used in other settings. But basically, I'm more of a father figure to a lot of pastors. Now that I'm older, I've been doing this for so long. I'm 62. I've been in ministry for 42 years. And so when I come along beside pastors now, it's more than just instructing or training. It's very relational. So that's a general overview of how I view what I do.
And for the sake of our podcast family, how would you define apostolic?
I think it's just more of a father figure.
Yeah.
Like
a leader of leaders, right?
Yes. That's that's like Paul and the guys in the Bible. Yes, we have the original apostles, but when Jesus set up the church through Paul in Ephesians, he said he was going to give us these ministry gifts, and the apostle is one of those gifts. And I don't think it was just the original 12, I think it's a covering. It's like an overseer, a bishop, anything like that. But I don't like any of those titles. So I was trying to just do something generic and it didn't really work.
No, I think it's good. One of the interesting things about your ministry is that you have moved kind of in different seasons. Mm-hmm. So, when you launched your Dale Sellers Leadership Incorporated, then you kind of did some work for the Unstuck group, and you've kind of done some different things. I think that there are a lot of leaders who are listening right now who always wonder about when it's time to move and what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, how do you discern God's voice when he's telling you to step into a new season?
With fear and trepidation. And the biggest example of that was I pastored a small church for 12 years, and it grew from 30 to 300 back to 150 in the 8th year because we had a terrible split. And then it became so unhealthy that in the 12th year, we closed it.
Oh, wow.
And you need to know how to hear God's voice if you close a church. And the reason we closed it was it wasn't healthy enough to hand off to anyone else. And so I go by leading. I go by just what I sense in my own spirit. I go by what my wife thinks. I go by what my closest friends, I give them ability to speak into my life and share what they see. But at the end of the day, I'm very confident in my ability to hear the Lord. I'm 62. I became a Christian when I was 7. And I tell everybody I was in a spring revival on a Tuesday night in a Baptist church in South Carolina. And I remember so clearly, just remembering that I needed to, for the first time, recognize I needed to receive Jesus myself. And so I went home that night and talked to my mom. My mom was in the bathroom taking off her makeup. And I went in and I said, "Mom, I need to talk to you." I said, I don't think I'm a Christian." And she said, "Why?" So I told her the stuff that I was feeling. She said, "Well, I think you're right." And so my mother prayed with me to ask Jesus to come in my life. The next night I went forward, made it public. And then I was baptized publicly that following Sunday.
Wow.
That was, what is this? That's 55 years ago. And it began a walk with the Spirit of God in my life that's never waned. I think one of the mistakes we make is we think in bad times, hard times, or if we get off the rails or we get immoral or we do something goofy that somehow the Holy Spirit bails out till we get our act back together. That's not true. He's there in good times, bad times. And so I'm very confident in the ability to hear what I think God's saying do. And so I hope that answered what you were asking.
Yeah, it's perfect. The 95 Network is a really interesting ministry. It ministers to places where I serve and have served. Tell us what about the genesis story behind it and how you got involved.
Well, there's a fellow named Jim Powell who pastored a church in Peoria, Illinois, who started 95 Network because even though he was pastoring a large church over 1,000, had a real passion for the small and the mid-sized guy, wrote a book called Dirt Matters, connected with a fellow named Carl Vaders, who wrote a book called The Grasshopper Myth. And so just was inspired, wanted to create some kind of process or something to help small churches to get strategy, to get organized, to just a lot of things. And so Jim founded a nonprofit, and then I came along. I think he founded it in 2014, and then I was on his board. And then through a series of events, he needed to step away, so he turned it over to me and a group of pastors, and so I've been leading it since 2018.
And what constitutes a small to medium sized church? What are we talking about here? And what percentage, because I know the answer to this, but I think it's important for the podcast family to know, what percentage of churches in America make up that demographic?
Well, I think it's shocking to most people because what they see either on television or media or they know famous authors, so they think most churches are large. But the name 95 for the 95 Network comes from the fact that of the 300,000 plus churches in America, 95% of them have less than 500 people attending. 87% have less than 200 people attending, and 75% of all churches have less than 100 people attending. And what I want you to know, Tony, is those are pre-pandemic numbers.
Oh, wow.
So if you reduce all those by 30%, then those numbers will be more accurate to what we see today. And so the reality is the vast majority of churches in America, the backbone of the church in America is the small and the mid-sized church, but to me, it's the most underserved and under-resourced because there's not a conglomerate of small church gatherings. I mean, you have denominations and that kind of thing, but there's not like the National Small Church Convention. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so most small church leaders will go to a conference at any church. church. And I'm not putting down conferences, and I'm not putting down the big church. I love the church. But in our case, we feel called to the small and the mid-size. And so a small church pastor attends a big conference, and they walk away with one of two thoughts. Either they walk away going, man, I'm so glad those folks could do that, but I could never do that. Or worse, they go back and try to do at their small church what they saw at the mega church. So they buy a few moving lights and get a haze machine, and they lose their job in 2 weeks because someone said they set the church on fire. And it's not smoke, it's haze. But so what happens is, leadership principles are leadership principles, but
Sure.
you have to be able to apply them in the context of your ministry. And that's where the disconnect happens, is when you try to adapt, something that may be happening at a large church somewhere at Saddleback or something. Yes, those principles work, but you have to apply them in the context of your leadership, of your giftedness, especially if you're in your rural church. And so sometimes we try to plug and play something that doesn't fit.
All right. So my audience are faith-driven executives and entrepreneurs. They're type A personalities. A lot of them go to the churches that you described, and some of them go to those mega churches, right? Like my buddy Greg goes to a mega church here in Centerville, loves it, has been going there since it was a small church.
Sure.
He's grown with the church. But then I have other friends like Matt and Emma who go to my church, and it's kind of a smaller size church. When you think about faith-driven executives and entrepreneurs, talk to me about their role in the churches that you just described.
It's huge. It's so huge. One of the things that I deal with when I work with churches is that when you start trying to help a small church develop strategy, they immediately the flags go up, and they're like, "Oh, you're trying to turn this into a business." And I tell them that in the Greek, the word strategy is spelled PLAN. All the strategy is a plan. And so here's the thing about small churches and specifically your audience. The people in your audience are very successful in the business arena. And they're usually asked to be on the boards of churches because they're successful in those arenas. But for somehow they aren't given the opportunity to apply the principles that they've used in those arenas to be successful to their church. And there's this disconnect where it's like, oh, if you're just trying to turn this into a business. In fact, I was at a church gathering not long ago where one of the guys was very upset because in the membership class, it talked about the corporate gatherings, and he didn't know what that word meant. So he thought we were trying to turn the church into a corporation. And we had to all say, no, we're just talking about the gathering of a bunch of people, And so there's just this disconnect that somehow you're trying to turn the church into a business. And there is a business side of church. But the reality is this. Tony, you know this, I know this. Our calling as pastors, as leaders, is to equip saints to do ministry. And that's where the folks listening to your podcast can be hugely helpful.
Let's say that you're talking to a leader who already feels overwhelmed with their day job. They're faith driven. They give. Maybe they're not up to quite to a tithe, but they're on a plan to get there. Right? They're leading at work, and so when they come to church on Sunday, they really just want to soak in the presence of God. They just want to be there. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to be responsible for anything. And let's be honest, if you go to a medium to small church long enough, someone's going to ask you to engage in something. So help me sell the large church or the person who's on the fence about whether they should go to the mega church where they can just show up and receive, or the small to medium sized church where eventually you're going to have to put, get in the water, so to speak.
Well, I think the simple question is do you want to have a biblical life? Because Ephesians 4 just makes it very simple that the calling of the apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, and teacher is to equip saints to do ministry. And then the next four verses 13, 14, 15, and 16, teach that when a pastor or a leader equips the saints, you're going to have maturity, You're going to have stability, you're going to have integrity, and you're going to develop community. You can't develop community if you have parts of the body that aren't functioning. You can't develop the overall impact of that church if you have people in that church who are not stepping up to the plate. Now, I want to say something to the other side of that, though. One of the biggest problems that we have in the small church is we try to do too much.
Yeah.
We have a church of 80, and then down the road 5 miles is a church of 3,000, and we feel like we have to offer everything they offer, and we can't do that. We don't have the people, we don't have the money, we don't have the space, and so one of the reasons that people do get burned out in small churches is because 20% of the people always do 80% of the work, and when you're doing too much, you have the same 20% of the people doing everything. So it's incumbent upon the leadership of the church to zero in on what their specific mission and vision is, and quit trying to do everything, because most small churches are known for doing 20 things poorly instead of 1 or 2 things well.
That's so good. And if Dale stepped on your toes right there, that's Dale at 95network.org. No, I'm just kidding. It's so important, right?
But on the way, go to Ephesians 4 first, verses 11 through 16.
I think that's right? Because I think oftentimes what we've done is we've relegated church to a building instead of the people, right? And so the people it's really meant to be the people group. And so no matter how big or small the group is, we need to be equipping the folks. So it's not come in and watch. It's follow me and I'll teach you how to fish.
Think about this, Tony. The number one strategy in most churches, and even some large churches, the number one strategy is need.
Yeah.
Well, need's not a volunteer strategy. If need were a strategy, then God would meet all the needs and we wouldn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
But the reason that happens is, again, because we're trying to do too much. We're not honed in on our mission and vision. Our mission is to throw a plate of spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks, and that's what we do. And God can't bless that. We got to hone in on our specific calling. We teach at 95 Network, your mission is why you exist. And you ought to be able to say it in 12 words or less, because that way you can communicate it to everyone. When you want to be able to tell everybody about Jesus, and you want to tell them about your church. And we overcomplicate everything.
Yeah, we would say at Centerville Grace, we make disciple makers.
I like that.
That's what we do. That's just good. What we're, and so if you're going to come long enough, we're going to expect you to make disciple makers, or we're going to encourage you to find another community of believers that will help you grow in a way that feels like God is calling you to.
That's simple. But see, it's simple. One of my favorites of a church I work with in Georgia, their mission statement is life is better connected. See, I love that. I can preach on that for a year. Connected to God, connected to my spouse, connected to my kids, to my church family, to the community. And so it's very easy to articulate why they exist. They want to help people get connected. Well, when I meet a pastor for the first time and I ask them what their mission is, and they have to pull out their phone and read it, then I know they don't know it.
Yeah.
Not just because they can't quote it, but it's not about being in your head. You got to get that in people's hearts.
Hey guys, just pausing this conversation to remind you to check out some of our incredible partners. If you're looking for your forever home, your next home, or a vacation home, Trent is the man you need to talk to. Trent over at the Barga team wants to help you find the next perfect fit. Go to his website today. The link is in the show notes. You can also check out his YouTube channel for all the good information on what you need to look for in your next home. Speaking of homes, you've got to talk to my man, Greg Fay, about homeowners insurance. Home, auto, everything in between. I have all my insurance needs met through Greg. Go to gregfayinsurance.com today. Get your free quote and tell him Tony sent you. Now, let's finish up this conversation. Now, I believe that pastoral ministry is one of the few roles that often gets second-guessed, gets questioned, gets armchair quarterback, right? So there's pastors, police officers, coaches at any level, football, baseball, whatever, like all of those professions, people feel like they have permission to kind of speak into and say, I can't believe you did that, or why would you do that? Right. And doctors, same way, actually. And so let me ask you this. There's some leaders listening right now who have the ability to walk alongside their pastor. Right. And they're going to have their pastor's ear. And I'm curious, if you were going to give them a piece of advice on how to support the man or woman that's leading their church, what advice would you give them?
Encourage them. I'm naturally an encourager. There's a gift in Romans 12 of encouragement. I have that gift, but I don't get that gift. I don't receive that gift very often, and it's always very frustrating when you've presented something, you've led somewhere, there's been a move of God, there's been something special happen, and no one says anything. Pastoring's like being a sound man. The only time people notice you is when you have feedback. And so walk along beside them and encourage them. I think it's very simple why 95% of our churches are small and mid-sized. I think the first reason is a lot of pastors need to be needed. And so what happens is, they got into ministry to validate something or to affirm something, which does not happen. And so they never hand things off because they need to get that pat on the back. They need to get that praise. They need to say, hey, somebody come up, put their shoulder all around us and say, hey, attaboy, good job. A lot of pastors need to be needed, and that's not healthy. But the second reason, and this speaks to kind of your question, that I think most churches are small and mid-sized, is the governmental structure of the American church is not biblical, it's American.
Oh, come on.
So hang with me. We have this mindset that the church is a democracy and we vote on stuff. And the only time in the Bible that a large group voted that I can find is in the Old Testament, and the ground ate them. So you don't really want to go down that road where everybody's voting to do stuff, because you can't accomplish anything.
Yeah.
And so our governmental structure is not biblical. And so we look at the pastor as a hireling. And all I want you to understand is I don't think God can bless that. When we don't structure it the way he told us to structure it, I don't think he can bless that. And I think that's why the overall church in America is right now is in decline. Now, I'm believing that things are going to change. I think there's some signs that some things are changing.
Revival's coming.
It is, because the next generations are looking for something real.
Yeah.
And I think we need to make sure we mention this too. The other huge dynamic that's happening in the church is the baby boomers are aging out.
Yep.
I'm the bottom end of the baby boomers, and we're all going on to heaven. In fact, we're the group that Barna labeled as the Duns after COVID, and the Duns were the people who were just like, I'm done. I'm not going back. And so they were your givers, your servers, your attenders. And so how we do church in the next 10 years is going to change dramatically, I believe.
I can't wait.
Yeah, I understand that completely.
I love that you mentioned identity, because it's a part of your story that I wanted to kind of unpack a little bit.
Okay.
I was hoping that you would tell me about how important the second verse of the song Jireh is.
You don't want me tearing up, do you? So I hope maybe
I'm set. I'd like for you to just kind of take us down that journey, because this ended up becoming a huge identity moment for you.
Yes.
And it healed some things inside of you that I think a lot of leaders who are listening will relate to.
Well, here's the deal. So I grew up with a father who's a house builder. I got my builder's license when I was 18. I had planned to work with him building houses. And then God had been calling me for a while in the ministry, but I didn't want to go into ministry because I thought I was going to have to go to a foreign country, and I didn't want to do that. And so it was great when I finally figured out that God didn't want me to do that. So I'm in ministry, but what had happened to me growing up, my dad and I, we worked very well together, but my dad was not verbal, so he didn't affirm me. And so I began to work harder, try to get him to acknowledge me, just to say, hey, man, you did a great job. He would tell you and your wife I did a great job, but he wouldn't tell me. Well, at some point in my life, I began to shift that need for affirmation or feeling like I had to do things. I had to perform. I had to work to measure up. I shifted that over to my walk with God. And I got to this place to where I just felt like a complete failure in ministry. A friend of mine in 2014, he and I were talking, and I told him, I said, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone. I said, I feel like a complete failure because I thought I'd be there by now. I thought I would have built a bigger church, because my model growing up was great pastors, or people would say this stuff like, well, healthy things grow. And so because our church didn't grow, it must be unhealthy. Now, the reality is unhealthy things grow too, but that's another conversation. And so I got to this place in my walk with God where I thought Jesus was mad at me. I felt like I was going to go to heaven, but he was going to stick me off in some corner somewhere, or I was going to get to be a street sweeper because I was not accomplishing what he wanted me to do. The problem was I couldn't define what that was. So I became very, very, very performance oriented, very driven, did a lot of stuff, but never could be satisfied.
So just let me recap that, because I think that you're stepping on a lot of leaders' toes, or you're reading their mail,
okay.
Right? And so because you never heard how loved you were verbally, because you never physically heard it, you inadvertently went to a place that said, if I don't perform, I'm not worthy of love.
Absolutely. And the really crazy thing about that is I grew up Baptist, and we were taught, you're saved by grace through faith, and it's a free gift, and you can't do anything to make God love you anymore, and you can't do anything to make God love you any less, but then you prove how saved you are by your works. Yeah. That's the way I grew up. And so I just worked hard, and this became, I wasn't aware of this. You understand? This was in my DNA. And so God began to do a healing process in me. I wrote a book. The title of the book is called Stalled: Hope and Help for Pastors Who Thought They'd Be There by Now. David C. Cook published that book, which just blew my mind. Yeah. And so I thought once I wrote the book that I was better. But then God calls me on a sabbatical a few years ago. And on the 8th day of that sabbatical, my wife, my daughter, and myself and a friend got caught in a riptide and got pulled way out in the ocean, and I almost drowned. I mean, I came within seconds of drowning, and it just broke me. It just broke me in two. Well, parallel that with the fact that I had just heard this new song by these guys that's called Jireh. And the verse, the opening verse says, "I'll never be more loved than I am right now. I wasn't holding you up, so there's nothing I can do to let you down. You don't need a trophy to make you proud. I'll never be more loved than I am right now." Well, I'm going, wait a minute, that's really good. God just loves me. I knew that theologically, but not in my heart. But the second verse of the song, it says, "I'm going through a storm and I won't go down. I hear your voice calling on the rhythm of the wind. Call me out. You would cross an ocean so I wouldn't drown. I'll never be more loved than I am right now." And I just heard that song. And then a few days later, I almost drowned in the ocean. So it impacted me massively. And I still ended up in my sabbatical was almost drowning, going to counseling for a week in Dallas, Texas. And then my wife and I and our youngest daughter, who almost drowned with us, getting COVID for 14 days, the worst version of COVID you could imagine, and being sick as a dog. So I'm probably not going to do any more sabbaticals.
Although you wouldn't be here today if you hadn't, right? And so one of the things that's interesting, I listened, was that episode 291 where you talked about coming back from sabbatical?
91.
And one of the things that you said in that episode that was so profound to me is that the moment right before you guys were brought in, you were brought in specifically on a boogie board.
Yeah, God came and helped me.
And so there was a wind gust that helped bring you closer to the shore so that you could get back in.
It pushed everybody, pushed my family back in. Because again, I'm almost drowning. My wife is like, do I need to go save my husband? Do I try to save my daughter? Because she's a good swimmer. But our friend broke out of the riptide, and she went and just yelled at a guy, and he couldn't see us. He just swam in the direction she said, because she said this guy's drowning, and he brought a boogie board out there, and I held onto the boogie board, and this stranger who I never even got to think, he pulled me in.
And then the next day you went to the hospital. Wasn't that maybe the next day or the day after?
I was in the ER that night.
Yeah, you were in the ER that night. So then the next day you went back into the ocean to get a picture, a family picture in that same ocean. And here's what's crazy is that this is not the first time that you almost drowned.
Did it 15 years before with my dad in a canoe. Yeah. And went the next day and got back in the canoe, and fished the river, because it's such an important part of me. I didn't want to lose that. But now I have to say this, I have to qualify. When I got back in the ocean, it was only knee deep.
Let me talk about this, because I think that one of the things that I love about your story, and I was so thankful to listen to that podcast, is that you went head straight in to the pain of your past for the sake of your future.
Had to, even with the first almost drowning. We have a river every spring for 30 years. I've been fishing. That it's just part of my life. I've been able to do that, and I wasn't going to let that experience rob that joy from me. Same thing with the ocean. Our family loves the ocean, and it's been part of our lives for vacation and stuff. I had to go face it. And see, I was learning about trauma. You and I talked about this on our podcast. I was learning about trauma and the fact that trauma doesn't go away. God can heal you and give you peace, but you've got to replace the last part you got to replace that trauma with a good thought at the end. And my good thought was I didn't drown. The good thought was that there was a guy with a boogie board, even though I ended up, on a back. But I mean, the story is hilarious of how they carried me out. And I mean, it was just like, Laurel and Hardy, if you know who that is, carrying me out to the ambulance. The ambulance got lost in the subdivision or in the complex that they were in, trying to get me to the hospital. And I'm like, I was just in complete disarray of what's going on.
We'll link to episode 91 in the show notes. Make sure that you go and listen to that. I suggest subscribing to the podcast too. If you are in one of the churches that kind of fit the profile that Dale serves.
Hey friends, I'm Annie F. Downs, author, speaker, podcaster, and part of the That Sounds Fun network. And I'm a big fan of seeing God move in our everyday lives. Can we talk for a second about what it really means to be a person of faith? It's waking up every day and choosing to trust him, even when life feels uncertain. It's standing firm in truth, walking in grace, and knowing that God is always with us. But I know staying rooted in faith is not always easy. At least it isn't for me. And that's why I love Glorify, the #1 Christian devotional app designed to help you start, grow, and strengthen your relationship with God every single day. One of the things I love about Glorify is the amount of options available to me through the app every day. Not only does it help me kick off my time with God with their daily devotional, but there's a song of the day to listen to and a community of other users available to engage with. It's really cool. With Glorify, you can begin your morning in scripture, reflect with the daily devotional, and end the day with the daily walk with God, this immersive experience that quiets your heart and refocuses your spirit. It's one of my favorite hacks, something simple but powerful that keeps you anchored when life gets busy. And since we're shining a light on women this month, let's celebrate the strength, faith, and stories of women who inspire us every day. And for the men listening, think about how you're uplifting the women of faith in your life. Join me and over 20 million believers who have found encouragement through Glorify. Download the app today at glorify-app.com/podcast, and let's keep walking in faith together. Again, that's glorify-app.com/podcast.
One of the interesting things that came out of that is that your time with a counselor, and one of the things you guys talked about in the podcast that I thought I would love to hear more about is the idea of a grief journal.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that role that the grief journal played in your life, and what exactly is a grief journal?
It's just writing down those bad moments. It's taking your time to really stop and look at, and see, even talking to him, and I don't remember if this came out in the podcast or not, but I remembered that when I was in the 5th grade, my best friend got killed by a school bus. I had not talked about it since then, because back in that time, we weren't allowed to go to the funeral or viewings or anything. It was just like, I'm with my best friend, one day, and then the next day he's gone forever.
Wow.
And so that was the first thing that dug up that I hadn't even thought about. But just different moments in your life where you realize that you were, you lost something, you're grieved. And if you don't acknowledge that and write it down, and then right when you got released from it, then it just cycles in your head. And so that was very helpful. I had a pastor friend who hurt me deeply, that I had just tried to put on a happy face and move on with, and I had to let him go. And so it was very important. It was very cathartic just to get that stuff out. Now, what I do, and I've counseled people to do this for years. I have a cousin who had some real issues with his father when he passed, and I said, listen, write him a letter.
Sure.
Be as honest as you can, and then burn it. Don't keep the thing. And so that I think it's at some point, even if with a grief journal, it doesn't become your Bible.
I usually make them read it out loud.
Yeah.
Like, hey, write the letter, read it out loud to me, and then let's burn it. Let's as an act of surrender.
Yeah. At some point you have to forgive.
Yeah.
You have to forgive. No matter who's done what to you, you have to forgive, because I've always said, unforgiveness is like a tether ball, like we had in elementary school. It'll just wind you tight. It's a ball on the end of a rope, and you hit it and it winds tight. And unforgiveness will wind you tight around that moment in time, and everybody else moves on, including the person who offended you. They go on with life, and there you are. You're stuck 40 years ago, and you can't live that way. That's why Jesus, I think he modeled for us multiple things, but on the cross, when he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. With him forgiving at that level, I've been hurt, but I can't touch that one. So I have to follow his model.
So one of the things that I appreciate about you is that you're not just that you seem to me like you're in a constant state of healing. And between leading the network, creating content, podcasting, you and I were just talking yesterday. You just finished building your home. Like you're doing all the things. What does healing on an average day in February look like for Dale? Like what does the activities, what can we steal from you that are just good disciplines?
Slow down. Sit on the porch. I do a lot more sitting than I used to. Because again, see, you got to understand, and I'm going to go into this with you, and I did in our podcast. I am so driven to do things that I keep score. So like a lot of your listeners are into doing, this is nothing wrong with this. I think it's awesome, but doing what they call the spiritual disciplines, and they've got all these measures. Or we just finished a season in January where many churches will do a 21-day fast. I have to be very careful about that kind of stuff because I start keeping score. Like the 21-day fast, I mentioned this to you that our church was doing the specific thing on YouVersion. And after 3 days, I quit doing it because after you finished reading the scripture, you checked it off. And then after you read the devotion, you checked it off. Well, I don't want to get in that. I don't want to be there anymore with Jesus. The thing that helped me the most is my counselor in Texas. His name is Bob Hamp. And the thing that he did for me the most was many years ago, he taught a message called The Problem Jesus Came to Solve. And that revolutionized my life. It helped me to be able to write my book. It helped me to get through the healing. It's one of the things, it's a layered kind of revelation that I still walk in. And basically, to sum it up, it's this. If you ask most people, why did Jesus come? They will say he came to die on the cross to forgive us for our sins, which is absolutely true. Yes, he did. But if you listen to what Jesus said of himself, the reason he came was he said, I've come to give you life. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the resurrection and the life. He was constantly referring to himself as life. And the reason he did that is because that's what we lost in the Garden of Eden.
Wow.
In the Garden of Eden, there's two trees, but we never talk about but one. We talk about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that tree gets a lot of recognition, but we don't talk about the tree of life. And Bob teaches us that he feels like there was fruit that people could eat from, Adam and Eve could eat from the tree of life. And God said, man, hang out with that tree. Just don't go to knowledge. Don't let knowledge be your driver. Because, and you keeping score is a way of knowledge. And so what basically, to sum it up, is, Jesus didn't come, or basically what Bob said was, he said, people get in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so they go, okay, how's your spiritual life? How you doing today, Tony? Well, let's see. I prayed this morning. I gave him a tithe at church this past week. I did some counseling. So I'm doing great. Or it's like, well, man, my kid got in a fight. I kicked the dog. I cheated on my taxes. If we start thinking about what we do. And so he says what happens to most people is they're hanging out in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but they judge their spiritual life by which limb they're on. Am I on the limb of evil today or a limb of good?
Wow.
And he says, but either way, you're still in the wrong tree. And then he summed it up by saying this: Jesus didn't come to make bad people behave well. He came to make dead people alive. And that simple concept put me on the road to healing. Because I've spent most of my life with a knowledge of not measuring up, or knowledge of I could have done more. Again, always looking for the affirmation that I didn't get from my father. And now I recognize that. So that's why I sit on the porch a lot. I will spend hours sitting on my porch. Last Sunday, a week ago, we had beautiful weather here. I had four hours on a Sunday. I sat on the porch swing, just listening. I don't cut the radio on very much anymore. When I drive down the road, I just keep the noise away so that I can hear in my spirit that I'm affirmed, that I'm loved, that I'm accepted. And I'll say this too, and I shouldn't probably say this because it'll be misunderstood. But in some ways, I feel like sometimes I'm the most carnal I've ever been because I don't do all the things that everybody says I'm supposed to do. But I also feel like I'm the most free spiritual I've ever been. In fact, I guess my big deal is I'm living in freedom today.
Wow.
And I love it.
That's so good.
But I am in a healing process, and I think that's going to be till I die.
I love all of that. When you think about how my church family loves to pray.
Oh, good. That's a good church.
And my podcast family loves to pray. And so one of the things that I love to ask leaders is how we can pray for what you're leading. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about the 95 network and when you think about the backbone of churches that you guys represent, that really you are as a network, what is the prayer that we should come alongside with?
Please pray that we will connect with everyone that needs what we do. And here's what I mean. I spent so many days when I was pastoring our small church, because there was no 95 network then. There were not the ministries that are today. And I would lay on the floor and I would cry for a friend. I would just cry and say, God, please give me someone I could talk to. I remember one time, Tony, I reached out to a board member and I just said, listen, I would like to share with you some things I'm going through, some things I'm feeling. And he said, stop, Pastor. We're sitting in a restaurant and he did what I'm about to do. He did this, Tony. He put his hand up in front of my face and said, Pastor, stop. I don't want to hear this. He said, my life is a disaster and I need your life to be perfect. So please don't tell me.
Wow.
And so I remember walking away from that going, well, I guess as pastors, we can't talk to anybody, which is a lie. And so the prayer that I pray, that I want you to pray, that I would love for people to keep agreeing with, is that those people who need what we do will be able to find us. It will be able to connect, because there's so much noise out there. There's so many things being offered out there, but we just want to connect with them, because our vision is to have healthy churches before we have churches that grow numerically. We want them to be healthy first.
I love everything about that. Where can people find you on the interwebs? I have one more question for you, but before we get there, what's the best place to learn all things Dale, all things 95 Network, all things?
The numbers 9 and 5, 95network.org. Everything you need is right there. You can connect with me, email, whatever you want to do, but it's all right there.
And the name of your podcasts?
It's the 95 Podcast.
Yeah, that's right. So good.
Yeah, it's not hard.
Okay, Dale, last question I love to ask people. It's an advice question, except I get to invite you to go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, although I get to name the season of life that you're in.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to take you back to your very first day preaching before, the very first day before you preached your first message. If you could go back in time, sit knee to knee with that younger version of yourself, look him in the eye and give him one piece of advice, what are you going to tell him?
I'd tell him what my wife told me. Just be yourself. I wore a 3-piece black polyester suit, and I had a Bible, and I could fold it and point just like my favorite pastor. And I tried my best to be like him. And she said, you just need to be yourself.
Wow.
It was good advice.
Thank you so much for being so good to so many churches and pastors and leaders. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you for being so generous. It's been so much fun to connect with you.
Oh, I feel the same way too. I feel like we have a kinship, man. And so anything I can do to help you guys or any of your listeners, if there's anybody listening, especially a small church person listening going, hey, I'm in a mess, please reach out to us. One of our big things that we help with is something called Soul Care Essentials. And we want to help pastors get healthy and not just lead pastors, but staffers to get healthy on the inside so they can create a healthy ministry. Okay.
And that's at 95network.org, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. I love it. Thank you. Thanks again, Dale. I appreciate it. Congratulations. By making it to the end of today's episode, you are now officially a member of the End of the Podcast Club, the Inner Circle. I'm so thankful you took the time to listen today. I would love to hear from you. What was your big takeaway? Email me, tony@twmilt.com. I'd love to hear about what God nudged you on during this conversation today. I'm also super thankful for Dale. His heart for the local church is so important. And I think it's wildly important for us as leaders to lean in to what it means to be part of that church community. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for leaning in. Thank you for being one of the bold ones. As always, if you need anything from me, I'm embarrassingly easy to find. Tony@twmilt.com or on Instagram @twmilt. Forever thankful for you, the bold ones. As always, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.
Over time, life can get you down. Discouragement starts to creep in, and eventually we just stop letting ourselves hope for more. We say things like, I'll believe it when I see it, and don't get your hopes up. Sounds like good grown-up advice, right? Actually, it's not. Hey, I'm Christy Wright, #1 national best-selling author, speaker, business coach, and mom of 3. Oh, and I have a podcast called Get Your Hopes Up, which is what I want to tell you about. Romans 15:13 says, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him so that you may overflow with hope by power of the Holy Spirit." And that is exactly what my show is about. Whether I'm telling one of my latest crazy God stories or giving you practical advice to live out your faith, I love hanging out with you every Monday to help you get to know God, get closer to him, and get your hopes up again. Listen to Get Your Hopes Up wherever you get your podcasts, and you can learn more at getyourhopesup.com. That's getyourhopesup.com.
What if more important than being right is how we handle being wrong? Holding tightly to ideas that can't adapt with new information is not a virtue, it's a vice. I'm Heather Thompson Day, and I'm inviting you to join me over on my podcast, What If I'm Wrong?, where I'll be your guide through real life questions.
Okay, today we have a submission story, and it is wild.
Subscribe to What If I'm Wrong? Available wherever you listen to podcasts.